Hello, Mr. Sessions.
Yes.
Donald Trump has asked various individuals to pledge an oath of loyalty to him. Did Donald Trump ever ask you to pledge an oath of loyalty to him?
No.
If Donald Trump were to ask you to pledge loyalty to him or to take such an oath, would you do so?
Well, I don't know what a pledge of a loyalty oath is. We all owe loyalty to our supervisors. I've always done that to my bosses and supervisors. So, you know, people are expected to be loyal to their executive branch head. But if you're talking about some sort of improper loyalty oath that goes beyond a commitment to
Thank you, Mr. Sessions. Let's talk
following the
about
law, I have
Thank you,
not.
Mr. Sessions. Reclaim my time. Let's talk about your contacts with a foreign power. So last year, how many interactions did you have with Russian government official Sergei Kislyak? I just need a number. Is it 3?
Well, of all foreign officials or just?
Russian government official, Ambassador Sergei Kislyak, last year, how many interactions did you have with him?
I spoke at the Republican convention. I came off the platform and people were there and we chatted a moment, had an encounter. Couple of months later, I believe in September, he asked for a meeting and I provided that. I met with over approximately 25 ambassadors last year, and I had that same day as, well, excuse me.
Thank you, Mr. Sessions. Thank you.
Well,
as Attorney General, you have a security clearance, correct?
yes.
And to get that security clearance, you submitted a security clearance application, also known as an SF-86 form, correct?
That's correct.
I submitted such a form when I served on active duty in the U.S. Air Force. And the form requires you to certify under penalty of perjury that the information submitted was true, complete, and correct to the best of your knowledge. You certified your security clearance form, correct?
That is correct.
I'm going to, on the video screen, show you a question from that form. And it says, have you or any of your immediate family in the past 7 years had any contact with a foreign government, its establishment, such as embassy, consulate, agency, military service, intelligence, or security service, etc., or as representatives, whether inside or outside the U.S.? The answer that you gave was no. What you just told us under oath was exactly the opposite. So I'm going to ask you, Mr. Sessions, were you lying then when you filled out the form, or are you lying now?
What I was told by my executive assistant when we did this form earlier, and then again when I was nominated for Attorney General, that the FBI authority says members of Congress and effectively government officials meeting people on an official basis, you were not required to list all these contacts.
Nothing in that question says you get to answer any differently because you're a U.S. Senator rather than, say, a young police officer. Isn't that right?
Well,
nothing in that question authorizes you to answer any differently. Isn't that right?
I would say that nobody at the FBI or any other place, to my knowledge, said you left that blank. Surely you've met with some foreign officials in the last 7 years. I've not had any private business dealings or any things of that nature. My contacts would be in the normal course of
let me ask you one
senatorial business.
Let me ask you one of your interactions.
So I thought that was a reasonable answer.
You said under oath today that you had a meeting with Ambassador Kislyak of under an hour. That's pretty long. Was it more than 50 minutes?
I doubt it was 50 minutes, but it may have
45?
been 45, 50 minutes.
All right. Did you discuss campaign-related items such as Ukraine with the ambassador?
Well, that's not campaign related.
All right. I'm going to ask you 2 simple questions.
Yes, we did talk about Ukraine. We actually had an argument about the Ukraine because the day before, the Ukrainian ambassador was in my office making his case against Russia, and I raised those issues with Mr. Kislyak, and he was, as I referred to it, I think, the classic, we did nothing wrong.
I'm glad you're very animated.
Did everything wrong. That was his
Let me ask you 2 simple questions, because in a sense you've already answered it. You did have communications with the Russians last year, isn't that right?
Repeat that.
You did have communications with the Russians last year, isn't that right? Just yes or no?
I had a meeting with the Russian ambassador, yes.
Great. That's exactly the opposite answer you gave under oath to U.S. Senate. So again, either you're lying to U.S. Senate or you're lying to U.S. House of Representatives.
Well, that's
think
not
that
Time of
makes
the,
fair.
the time of the gentleman has expired. The witness can answer any further if he chooses to.
I won't repeat it, Mr. Chairman, but I hope the congressman knows, and I hope all of you know, that my answer to that question, I did not meet with the Russians, was explicitly responding to the shocking suggestion that I, as a surrogate, was meeting on a continuing basis with Russian officials, and the implication was to impact the campaign in some sort of nefarious way. And all I did was meet in my office with the ambassador, which we didn't discuss anything like that. So I just want to say I appreciate the congressman's right. I guess he can say it's free speech. He can't be sued here. So that's just my response, and I'm sorry that that's my response.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for appearing, Mr. Attorney General, and please express my gratitude to the men and women who serve the Department of Justice. You stated in your opening statement that my story has never changed, but Mr. Attorney General, it has changed 3 times, and today we heard the 3rd edition when you told us that you do now recall Mr. Papadopoulos mentioning that he had contacts in Russia. And so I have a slide for you that I'd like to display. It's a January 10th, 2017 exchange with Senator Franken where he asks about campaign communications with Russia. And you stated, Senator Franken, I'm not aware of any of these activities. Mr. Attorney General, if you were asked that question today, recalling that you are now aware of what Mr. Papadopoulos said on March 31st, would you answer that question differently?
All I would say to you, Congressman, is if you fairly treat the exchange I had with Senator Franken, I think you can understand where when I answered the question, I felt like I was answering it properly.
But you would agree today it should be answered differently if it was asked in the same form today, considering your recollection that you just gave us.
I believe that when you're asking me today, explicitly, did you meet with any other Russians?
Today-
I am prepared to say I did. I met with the ambassador in my office with at least 2 of my staff, senior respected patriots, colonels retired in the Army,
And Mr. Attorney
nothing
General-
improper occurred at all.
Once
So
and for all, can we answer the
I
question?
am once and for all answering the question,
Well,
Congressman. I don't understand why you won't take my answer.
Well, we're on the 3rd edition, Mr. Attorney General. So during your time on the campaign, did any person on earth state that they were communicating with Russians, traveling to Russia, or asked the campaign to meet with Russians, to your recollection?
Was I asked that question?
No, I'm asking you today, to your knowledge, did any person on the campaign tell you they were going to Russia?
I'm prepared to answer the question, but I just will not answer it in a way that suggests that I in any way intentionally misled anyone when I answered the question.
What's the answer to the question, Mr. Attorney General?
The answer is I met with the ambassador in my office for less than an hour, I believe, and he came up to me after a speech at the convention when it was raised to me that this months later. Nobody said immediately it was an error. By press, I immediately revealed and acknowledged or told them the meetings I'd had.
With respect to Carter Page, he told you, as you just acknowledged, that he was going to Russia. He was also on the national security team, and this is the 2nd person within about 3 months now that is bringing up Russian contacts, and you did not tell him to not go to Russia. Is that correct?
No, I didn't tell him not to go to Russia.
And you didn't tell anyone else on the campaign that he
And
had told you that? Is
I
that
don't
right?
recall him saying that, but am I supposed to stop him from taking a trip?
Well, at that point, did you think that now that 2 people have talked about either going to Russia or having contacts with Russia, that the campaign where you were the chairman of the national security team might have a Russia problem?
Well, if I read what's been said about the Papadopoulos meeting, the one that was somewhat earlier than that, I did say you don't represent something to that. I pushed back at his trip and was concerned that he not go off somewhere pretending to represent the Trump campaign. He had no authority for that. This young man didn't have any ability and ought not to be going off representing the campaign.
Mr. Attorney General,
Then
CIA
the next one is Carter Page, and he says, from what I see in his testimony, interviews, he said after the meeting was over, he goes out and
moving on, Mr. Attorney General.
he goes out and he says he's going to Russia. I made no response.
CIA Director Pompeo has called
So that,
WikiLeaks.
what does that mean?
Well, the
I
American
don't
people
think it
will
means
judge
that
that.
I've done anything dishonest.
Mr.
certainly
Attorney
doesn't-
General, the CIA Director has judged that WikiLeaks is a hostile, non-state intelligence service. Do you agree?
I'm not able to disagree with that.
But candidate Trump, who you were working for,
He's more
said-
aware of its activities perhaps than I.
But candidate Trump said throughout the campaign, "I love WikiLeaks." Do you love WikiLeaks, Mr. Attorney General?
I'm not a fan of WikiLeaks.
Do you think it was appropriate that Donald Trump Jr. communicated with WikiLeaks during the course of the campaign?
I'm not able to make a judgment about that.
Thank you again for
Time,
appearing.
gentlemen, has expired.
Mr. Sessions, I have a copy of the transcript of your testimony before the Senate Judiciary Committee in October. You stated under oath, "I don't recall," in some form or fashion 29 times. Is that correct?
I have no idea.
I have a copy of the transcript of your testimony before the Senate Intelligence Committee in June. You stated under oath, "I don't recall," in some form or fashion approximately 36 times. Is that correct?
I don't know.
In your testimony today, you have stated, "I don't recall," at least 20 times. Is that fair to say?
I have no idea.
Now, on October 4th, 2016, during a TV interview with Lou Dobbs, you criticized Hillary Clinton for telling FBI investigators, "I can't remember," approximately 35 times. You also stated during that Lou Dobbs interview that the intentional failure to remember can constitute perjury. Mr. Attorney General, do you still believe that the intentional failure to remember can constitute a criminal act?
If it's an act to deceive, yes.
Okay. Now, you testified in January that you had no contact with Russian operatives during the Trump campaign. Earlier today, you testified that your story has, quote, "never changed." Is that correct? That was your testimony earlier today, that your story has never changed, correct?
I believe that's fair to say.
Okay,
We've added things that I did not recall at the time.
Right.
So
On
my
March-
statement at the time was my best recollection of the circumstances, and as things are brought up.
Claiming my time, I understand.
All right.
Sir, you now acknowledge meeting with Ambassador Kislyak during the Republican National Convention, correct?
I remember I made a speech. He came up to me afterwards. I was standing in front of the speaker program and did chat with him.
Okay, thank
Had
you.
an
And you also-
encounter, not a meeting. It was just an encounter at that time.
Okay, and you also met with the ambassador in September of 2016 in your office, as you've acknowledged, correct?
He asked for an appointment. I had two senior staffers, both full colonels in the United States Army, retired in
Now, you
the meeting with me.
you testified in June before the Senate Intelligence Committee that you had not heard even a whisper about possible Russian involvement in the Trump campaign. Yet we understand that you attended this March 31st meeting where George Papadopoulos talked about potential communications with Russian operatives. But also, according to your third quarter 2016 FEC filing, you hosted a Trump campaign dinner meeting on June 30th, 2016 at the Capitol Hill Club, is that right?
That's correct, I
And your
believe.
Senate reelection campaign paid for that meeting, is that right?
I think that may be so.
Okay, and Carter Page and George Papadopoulos both attended that June 30th meeting, correct?
That has been reported.
And at that meeting, Carter Page told you that he was going to Moscow in a few days, is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
That's, and he,
Thank you.
he said it was a brief meeting as he was walking out the door. I don't recall that conversation, but I'm not able to dispute it.
Understood. Reclaiming my time, I've got limited time available.
That is not, does that establish some sort of improper contact
I think
with
you understand.
Russians?
I think you understand
He's
that.
not Russian either, you
You
know.
understand, sir, I get to ask the questions, you provide the answers in this capacity, you're no longer in the United States Senate. You voted in 1999 to remove Bill Clinton from office on charges of perjury, correct?
That is correct.
And connection.
Well, there were other charges. I voted
Simple
for
question.
impeachment, yes.
Yes, understand. To remove him, actually, impeachment's in the House. In connection with that vote to remove President Clinton from office, you gave this speech on the Senate floor on February 29th, 1999, and in it, you acknowledged that while serving as U.S. Attorney, you once prosecuted a young police officer who lied in a deposition. And in that speech, you decided to prosecute that young police officer even though he corrected his testimony. Now, you testified under oath before the Senate Judiciary Committee in January. You subsequently corrected that testimony in a March 6 written submission and have been forced repeatedly to come back to the Senate and now the House to clarify. When explaining your vote on the Senate floor to remove Bill Clinton from office, you stated that you refused to hold a president accountable to a different standard than the young police officer who you prosecuted. Let me be clear. The Attorney General of the United States of America should not be held to a different standard than the young police officer whose life you ruined by prosecuting him for perjury. I yield back.
The gentleman may respond if he chooses to.
Mr. Jeffries, nobody, not you or anyone else should be prosecuted, not me, or accused of perjury for answering the question the way I did in this hearing. I've always tried to answer the questions fairly and accurately. But to ask, did you ever do something, do you ever meet with Russians and deal with the campaign? You're saying Mr. Carter Page, who left that meeting, according to the press reports, and I guess his deposition or interview has been reported as saying, I'm going to Russia. I made no response to him, didn't acknowledge it. And you're accusing me of lying about that? I say that's not fair, Mr. Jeffries. I would say that's not fair, colleagues. That's not on any indication that I in any way participated in anything wrong. And the same with Mr. Papadopoulos. He talked about, it's reported in the paper, that he said something about going to Russia and dealing with the Russians, and I pushed back and said you shouldn't do it. So I don't think it's right to accuse me of doing something wrong. I had no participation in any wrongdoing with regard to influence in this campaign improperly.
I thank you very much. Mr. General, do you believe in this book, the Constitution of the United States,
Yes,
and will abide by it with all of your intentions?
that's exactly correct.
I thank you so very much. I took the liberty of reviewing federal crimes against children, particularly those dealing with sexual or physical abuse. As you well know, Lee Kaufman, Wendy Miller, Debbie Watson Gibson, Gloria Thacker Deason, and Beverly Young Nelson, these young women, have accused this individual, Judge Moore, who is running for a federal office, the United States Senate, of child sexual activity. Do you believe these young women?
I have no reason to doubt these young women.
And with that in mind, if you believe these young women, do you believe Judge Moore should be seated in the Senate if he wins? And would you introduce investigations by the DOJ regarding his actions?
We will evaluate every case as to whether or not it should be investigated. This kind of case would normally be a state case. I would say, Representative Jackson Lee, that the ethics people at the Department of Justice, and I've talked to them about that when this campaign started, it's the seat I used to hold, they advised me that the Attorney General should not be involved in this campaign, I have
Thank you,
friends in the
Thank you,
campaign.
Mr. General. I
I
only
have
have a short period of
steadfastly
time.
adhered
I want to
to
make sure that if he
view,
comes to the United
and I
States
think I
Senate,
should continue to
if
do
he comes
so.
to the United States Senate, that there would be the possibility of referring his case for at least a federal review by the Department of Justice.
We will do our duty.
Let me also refer you back to the meeting on March 31st, 2016 with Mr. Papadopoulos. You well know that Mr. Papadopoulos, in addition to his comments in the meeting regarding a meeting between Trump and Mr. Putin, had series of meetings dealing with, and as you can see, Trump, Mr. Papadopoulos, and you leading that committee. I cannot imagine your memory would fail you so much. But moving on, he was in that meeting, but you also had Stephen Miller, who is a senior policy advisor, who was noted in the stipulated statement of offense to receive conversations from Mr. Papadopoulos about his constant interaction with the Russians to intrude in the 2016 election. You continued in the October 18th meeting before the Judiciary Committee or hearing in the Senate to not answer the question. Now, in light of the facts that are now part of the record, do you wish to change your testimony before the Senate Intelligence Committee on June 13, 2017, where you said, I have never met with or had any conversation with any Russians or any foreign officials? Let me jump to the final part.
Well,
I have no
didn't.
knowledge of any such conversations by anyone connected to the Trump campaign. Do you want to admit under oath that you did not tell the truth or misrepresented, or do you want to correct your testimony right now?
You're referring to my testimony at confirmation?
Before the Senate Intelligence Committee, and my time is short, and I have two more questions, please.
Well, I'm not able to respond because I don't think I understand what you were saying.
I'm asking your Intelligence Committee testimony, do you want to change it where you indicated you had no knowledge of involvement of the Trump individuals involved in conversations regarding the Trump campaign Russians? And Mr. Miller supported Mr. Trump's press conference where he said, Russia, if you're listening, I hope you'll be able to find the 30,000 emails. Do you want to change your testimony that was where you said, I have no knowledge of any such conversations by anyone connected to the Trump campaign regarding Russians involved in the campaign? That was a testimony on June 13.
I'm not able to understand.
All right, let me move forward to the
Let me
idea-
say this, Mr. Chairman, could I?
The black identity, let me move to a document that you have prepared. The gentleman keeps saying he cannot recall, so I'm reclaiming my time.
Gentleman will suspend. The witness wants to answer the question she asked.
And I
he'll
should be given
granted.
extra time, and I do not have extra time. Let me move
Well,
to the black identity
gentleman will
extremist.
suspend.
I will
The witness will
suspend.
answer the question.
Yes or no? Does he want to change his testimony in the Intelligence Committee?
I would just say this. I stand by this testimony at the Intelligence Committee. I have never met with or had any conversation with any Russians or any foreign officials concerning any type of interference with the campaign or election in the United States. Further, I have no knowledge of any such conversations by anyone connected to the Trump campaign.
Thank you very much for that.
Now,
Let
what
me
I did
move
say
to-
in my opening statement, I explained that when I was asked in October, just a few weeks ago, when I was asked about the matter, did I have any knowledge of anyone who had talked to the Russians, I indicated that I had not recalled that meeting when that occurred. But I would have been pleased to have responded and explained it if I'd recalled it. I've tried to be honest about that and give you my best response and did throughout all the testimony I've given, Ms. Lee.
You stand by your testimony. Thank you very much. Are you familiar with the names Eric Garner, Walter Scott, Jameer Rice? My question is, as I hold up the poster dealing with the report under your jurisdiction, Black Identity Extremists, it is interesting to me that you are opposing individuals who are opposing lethal force, similar to the attack on Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King on COINTELPRO, but there seems to be no report dealing with the Tiki Torch Parade in Charlottesville chanting, Jews will not replace us. Why is there an attack on black activists versus any reports dealing with the alt-right and the white nationalists? Can you answer that question quickly?
I'm not
Are you
aware.
planning on investigating that?
When was that report completed?
In August of 2017.
I'm not aware of, I have not studied that report.
I ask you to because it's an attack on individuals who are simply trying to petition the government in a redress of grievances. Let me move to criminal justice reform. We have found that mandatory minimums and over-incarceration has been the history of criminal justice. We were moving toward criminal justice reform, which you opposed as the United States Senator, and now you intend to return toward discredited Nixon-era law and order criminal justice policies going to make America great or waste precious taxpayer dollars. Do you have any interest in rehabilitating those incarcerated, recognizing that mandatory minimums created the opportunity for over-incarceration rather than telling your prosecutors to prosecute on every single crime? Is there any opportunity to work with your office to deal with progressive ways of dealing with criminal justice reform at this time? Yes or no?
Yes.
All right?
I would just respond and say that Senator Durbin and I worked together to reduce the crack cocaine penalties some years ago. It probably remains the
Well, will you
largest
pull back on
single.
your-
The time of the
opposition-
gentlewoman has
You
expired. The
pull
witness
back
is
on your
allowed to
opposition
answer the last
mandatory
question.
minimums.
I'm sorry.
Time of the gentlewoman has expired.